Technical difficulties with the streaming and such. So if you get somebody at home that's texting you and saying you're not on YouTube, it's not working right this second, but Matt and Will have that fixed for us in just a couple minutes. But you know, they did have church before the internet, so maybe we can figure out how to do that again. Go ahead and get a songbook out. Those are those maroon things in front of you that we don't use anymore. Get one of those out. We're going to sing to get started this morning. We're going to sing number 859. 859, When All of God's Singers Get Home. One of my favorites. If you haven't picked up a bulletin, go ahead and pick one up. There's a lot of important information in there we need to be aware of. Our prayer list, we want to remember Kathy Johnson's little granddaughter who's having some health problems. Also, Courtney Weeks. We have in here that she's scheduled for surgery on the 27th and that Barrett's going to have his on the 31st. They're probably going to move Barrett's surgery up. He had to be life flighted to the hospital on Thursday. They were actually on their way up to camp, and he started throwing up and stopped breathing. And so he is at home and doing better, but they're really trying to move up his surgery to get that taken care of. So please be remembering them. Also, Teresa is recovering from surgery, so they have a lot going on right now. Bobby Bearden's recovering from a head injury after a fall. He's a member up at Hiawassee. Continue to remember April Evans as she recovers. That's Tim and Mary's daughter. Also, Janice Brown had pretty major back surgery this past week, and she's recovering at home, so we want to remember her. Ernestine Yancey, that's Roy Walker's sister. She lived in Australia, and she passed away on June the 16th. And if you want to travel to her service, it's going to be in, I think, Brisbane, Australia. So that's a road trip, but
You gotta leave early.
yeah, got to leave early. That's right. So we want to remember Roy and the family down there in Australia. And I think she was a slightly younger sister of Roy, but they were pretty close in age, if I remember correctly. So I want to be remembering Roy's family. And just all those. We've had a lot of loss lately among our church family, so I want to remember all those who are grieving. Anything we need to add to that list today? Okay. I know we have a lot of people traveling, so we want to remember everybody that's on the road as well for the holiday season. And just remember all those folks. We do have a couple of birthdays today. Danny Marshall and Gary Rittenberry celebrating birthdays. Happy birthday. And we have the new birthdays for July in the bulletin as well as July calendar, so check that out. A couple things coming up this week to be aware of. On Tuesday, ladies class still on, men's Devo still on, so please be a part of those. On Wednesday night after the service, I know some of our teens are going to stick around and have a World Cup watch party to watch Team USA. So if you want to hang out with us and do that, that'll be Wednesday night after church. On Saturday, we will gather in the parking lot to watch the fireworks like we normally do. and I think that we usually gather, Mark, you might be able to correct me, around 7 o'clock. Does that sound right? And so we'll update that maybe on Wednesday once we figure out exactly what time we're going to eat and all those things. And the fireworks usually start at dark. And so that's on Saturday, the 4th of July. Vacation Bible School, if you're not registered, please register. We're going to order t-shirts this week, probably on Monday, so that we can get those in. So please be registered for Vacation Bible School. Have a youth lock-in, float the river. We're also going to have a youth trip to Six Flags. Lots of stuff coming up, especially for our kids in the month of July, so be aware of that. Summer series continues tonight. Ryan Airy, who is the preacher for the Central Church in Cleveland, Tennessee. I was up there last week. He's going to be down here this week. His parents live in Blue Ridge, so he's very familiar with North Georgia. So we're looking forward to having Ryan here with us tonight. So just make sure that you're picking up a copy of the bulletin, keeping up with all those things going on. All right. Get your Bibles out if you would. I promised you last week that we were going to look at an interesting character in the Bible. We're actually going to do that in our Bible class lesson and sort of again in the sermon. We're going to look at Judas. And he is a very interesting character for a number of reasons. But if I was to ask you, what is Judas most known for? What would your answer be?
A kiss.
Okay, a kiss, a betrayal. And that's sort of his reputation. But I think it's really fascinating to think about the years preceding that. Because what was Judas's role before that moment?
Finance.
Well, yeah, even not his specific role, but what was his title? He was one of the 12. Right, he was an apostle, the keeper of the purse. He was an essential part of Jesus' ministry. And I think that's where I don't want to use the word misunderstanding, but that's where the mystery lies, I guess, is how could somebody be a personal part of Jesus' inner circle for 12 years, be with him all day, every day, see him perform miracles, watch him do good, and still betray him and turn him over to the authorities.
And Jesus knew he was going to do it.
Yes, and we're going to get into some of that stuff as well. Let's start in Matthew chapter 10. Let's start in Matthew chapter 10. And we're going to kind of jump all over the place, and I want this to be a discussion-oriented class, so feel free to jump in and interject at any time.
Jeremy,
Yes.
we're told where several of the other apostles were chosen. Are we ever told where he was chosen? When was Judas chosen?
Well, we're not specifically told when he was chosen. We are told, I believe it's in the beginning of Luke, that Jesus prayed before he chose the 12. And so I don't think Judas's choosing was any less significant than any of the others. My personal opinion, I believe that Judas shared an equal standing and status with all of the other apostles. And we'll look at kind of some of that here in Matthew chapter 10. So Judas is included here in Matthew chapter 10. We'll start in verse 1. Jesus called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. Notice, Does it say he gave that power to 11 and then took it away from Judas? No. So do we think that Judas drove out impure spirits and healed sickness? Absolutely. Judas had the authority to do that and the power to do that. And it lists the names in verse 2. These are the names of the 12. Simon, called Peter, his brother Andrew, James the son of Zebedee and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot. And then he adds that little tag on there, who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. As you go, proclaim this message: the kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. There's one thing in there that has always stood out to me, and we never get a specific instance of this, but he tells all of the 12, heal the sick, and what else?
Raise the dead.
You realize that Judas, it's not inconceivable to think that he literally brought someone back from the dead. And once again, the mystery, and we're going to talk about this during the sermon too, the mystery to me is, how could you see that power and even harness some of that power and still be willing to betray the one that gave it to you? I don't know. What do you think?
I think that he thought it should be used in a different way. We do pray for our world leaders, but there's a lot of military power out there that's used right sometimes, but it can be used wrongly.
Okay.
And I'm thinking Judas wanted to go a different direction.
Yeah. I think there's some evidence to back that up, right? And I was going to look at this later, but let's go ahead and look at that now. John 12. Turn over there in John 12.
Jeremy,
Yes, sir.
quick comment on verse 29. It says, Jesus said, according to your faith,
Yeah.
that they should do all these things.
Yeah. According to your faith. That's interesting. John 12. I have to hold it up closer. John 12. We'll start in verse 1. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Now, if you stop reading right there, this is a beautiful story. Jesus, of course, if Jesus had saved someone from death that lived in your house, you would want to honor him as well. So they have a dinner, and they pour out and they wipe his feet with the fragrant perfume. I guess even the more amazing part, how did she wipe it on his feet? With her hair. Now, I probably could have done without that part, but still, it's an act of humility, right, and all that. And so the story, if it stopped there, would be a great story. But look at verse 4. But one of his disciples, and I think this speaks to what Eric was saying a little bit, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him. Notice now, this is twice we've read about Judas, and what is it said both times? The betrayer. He hasn't done it yet, but they're giving us a peek into it. Who was later to betray him, objected, "Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages." He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was what? A thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Okay, so now we're seeing that while Judas shared equality, if we want to use that word, he was involved in the process of doing good and of the healing and all of those things, that there was darkness going on behind the scenes. So two things that stand out to me. One, Judas is questioning Jesus. And he's not just questioning Jesus in his mind, he's questioning him out loud. And so we would call that, if it was happening in our military, what would we call that? insubordination, maybe even something else. Rebellion, or if we charge somebody with a crime, what might it be? Treason, right? He is betraying Jesus with his words before the physical act.
Let me read the defense lawyer.
Sure.
What he did was not too different than what Martha did when she said, Lord, can you please tell Mary to get back here in the kitchen and help me a little bit?
Yeah.
He was appealing to Jesus to say, tell her not to waste his time.
Yeah. And I think the difference in those two instances is the intention, right? Because she just wanted some help. But here it says Judas, even though it sounded pure, his intention was not, let me, donate the money to the poor. It says he wasn't interested in helping the poor. But at face value, I agree with that. It says that. So number one, he's questioning Jesus. He's insubordinate. He's rebelling. But number two, we get the behind the scenes that what is his heart filled with?
I think that's good. It's Judas's heart.
Yeah.
That's causing the problem.
Yeah.
And I don't know that he fully understands that his heart is wrong.
Yeah.
To him, in his mind, and the way it works in his heart, he's thinking, okay, this is the way I think it should be.
Yeah.
And he's going forward to make that happen.
Yeah.
And we know that it just keeps going.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a perfect description of what is the major problem with his heart, if we really break it down to one word.
Covetousness.
Yeah, covetousness or greed.
That would apply to the power thing.
Yeah.
When they were arguing who was going to be the greatest, I'm sure he was right in on that argument.
Yeah. And it's interesting, when we read that argument, we just blame the two that are in the middle of it. But all the rest of them were mad too. They were all thinking, hey, it's me. But here, Judas's problem is greed, right? Can you imagine? Now, did the apostles have a great sum of money they carried around? Of course not. They had enough money to just handle little things. They didn't sleep in inns. They didn't go on these great journeys. Sorry, I just saw a bright light flash behind me. But they had money. What would have been some other money that maybe he had access to? What do you think? You think maybe money that they used to do good, to help others, right, who were struggling? We know later on that Paul is going to demand collections from the churches so that they can go and travel back and forth. Can you imagine Paul preaching about taking up a collection and then there's somebody sticking their hand in the collection plate? Listen, that happens today.
I'll give you an example.
Sure.
To me, it's like that. And I was so young, I didn't argue. As a young man, I assisted in counting the collection. And one of the respected older men in the church came up, and he had a check, and he would like to put it in there and get some cash out. And he said, I'm going to see my mother, and she's a widow. And I'm going to, the elders know about me. We had elders. They know that I do this regularly. And then he put a check in there to cash to give his mother the cash. Like I said, I was too young to object. But
Yeah, that's interesting. Great way to make change, I guess. Yeah. Listen, we have to be careful in that, right? We have a collection every Sunday, and most of the collection, I believe, I don't know, I'd have to ask Phil and Josh and the guys that handle that, is I believe most of it now is online, or if not, it's by check, but there's still people that put in cash. So, if we left it just to one person to go and count that money, it might be a temptation. We have two guys that go, and they count the money and set up the deposit, right? It's just that system of checks and balances that's very helpful. I have been made aware several times lately of people who have been guilty of that. One denominational church here in LJ several years ago, a preacher was let go for stealing money not from the collection but from a separate fund. Tens of thousands of dollars. There was a Church of Christ a couple years ago in Huntsville, and I'm familiar with the family that was involved in this, where they stole hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that just happened again at a church, and I wish I could remember. I think it was in the Atlanta area, a congregation of the Lord's Church where that happened. And so, listen, we can look down on Judas all we want to for that part of it, But if greed wasn't a temptation, it wouldn't have been the one that cost him his life, right? And so it's a heart problem with Judas, but it's a heart problem specifically with greed. Greed driven, or it drove him so much to the point that he acted on the greed, because the Bible doesn't say he was greedy, it says he's a what? A thief. And so obviously he had stolen money before. And so Judas here has a major problem, which is greed. Now, I wrestle with this, right? And I'm just trying to think about it on a practical level. Every day Judas is walking around, he's traveling, right? In the morning, performing miracles. In the afternoon, feeding the hungry. At night, stealing money out of the pot. It doesn't even seem possible, right? Yet, I want you to think about our lives. Sunday, we're here at church. On Monday, are we always exactly the same? Now, I don't think, at least I hope, that none of us would steal money out of the collection plate, but sins they're not ranked in order of how despicable they are. You know, we are people who are by our very nature contradictory. Would you agree with that? That and I like what it says in James chapter 3, right? With the same mouth, we sing praises, and in the same mouth we curse others. I believe it says we curse those who are made in the similitude of God in the King James Version, right? And so we are by our nature very, very contradictory, and so we look down at Judas, but Judas is not so different from us, other than the horrible act that ends up defining his life. And yes, ma'am.
I was just thinking of, yes, he's in the 12. He has been instructed to go heal and teach and all of that. But let's say Judy and I went to somebody, maybe we went downtown and we're meeting people on the street. I'm with Judy and Judy's doing all the talking. I'm present. I know all the things that are supposed to happen. I've had the instruction, but I'm just present with Judy. And
Yeah.
I haven't actually accomplished anything. Maybe Judy has, but I haven't accomplished anything. So we really don't know if Judas actually fulfilled that or not.
Yeah, that's true. You know, there's no way to know. I feel like, just, and this is me spitballing, that if Judas was not fully engaged, then we might have some indication of him being outside. But almost every time we read about them, it says the 12 are engaged in that. So whether or not he was actively a part of that, we do know he was in the group. But obviously, he is different from the rest. And not just in whatever he accomplished, but on the inside, he's different. And on the outside, he's different from the rest. I've wondered this too. Do you think Jesus knew he was stealing?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm a person who has a strange feeling about Judas. I don't hate him for what he did. That had to be done. Judas apparently was the perfect person for doing it. And I don't think God made Judas do this because it had to be accomplished. I think Judas did it on his own. That was part of the
Yeah.
thing. But anyway, I don't know how he looked at himself. I'm not sure that he looked at himself with the same eyes that the rest of us do
Yeah.
look at him. So I think he was maybe kind of floated through. It's like, well, this isn't going to hurt anybody. I'm going to take this and I'm going to do that. He did not. I don't know when he realized what it was leading to. In my opinion, he didn't realize it was leading to that until then.
So I think there's a good point there. We excuse our behavior, don't we? We don't even when we sin, we don't look at ourselves as these villainous monsters. And I'm sure he didn't either. I think there's a pivotal point though in Judas's life that we have to look at, and it comes in Luke 22. So turn back over there. And by the way, I asked a question a minute ago, and I didn't even answer it. If Jesus knew what Judas was doing, and I think you answered yes. I think Jesus knew all along, in the same way that God knows everything, what was going to happen. And it's in John 6, which you know is back towards the beginning of the whole story. I think it's in verse 70 and 71. Jesus says, "Did I not choose you, the 12, and one of you is," you remember what he said? A devil. And so he knew what was going to happen. But I do want to be very clear, and Miss Ann made this point for us a minute ago. We can, if we want to, look at Judas as a sympathetic character. But I'm not really willing to do that. And I'll tell you why. Because every human being has free will. And we use this example back in the Old Testament. Pharaoh, right? So the Bible, when it goes in, it talks about Pharaoh not letting the people go. And the Bible says, in some versions, not all the versions say this, something like, and I don't remember the exact wording, somebody can look it up if they want to, that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And so what a lot of people have said is, that Pharaoh, he didn't know any better, and that God controlled him and he made him do what he did. And there is the God that created us and the God we serve has never done that to anybody. Pharaoh made the choice. He had the free will to do what he wanted to do. What we can do, and what we can say, I believe, is that God knows people's hearts well enough to use them to accomplish his purpose. And I'm thankful for that. Right? We read that in Romans 8:28. God works all things together for good for those that love him, those that are called according to his purpose. I believe that God knows man well enough to know what he's going to do and what he's not going to do. And in this situation, God used Pharaoh to accomplish his will of proving his power through the plagues and through the parting of the Red Sea and all those things. The events of that story, the plagues and the parting of the Red Sea, that was the foundation of the Israelites' faith. If you go back and you read, every time they start to stray, or even in the New Testament when we read about their infidelity towards God, they always reference the events of the life of Moses to hey, remember this. Remember when God proved himself in the desert. Remember these things, right? So those very foundational events, God used Pharaoh to accomplish those. And I think that we can look at Judas maybe in sort of the same way. But we need to understand God didn't force Judas to do this. Judas had every chance to change his life, but his greed and the hardness of his heart were the catalyst for him to do what he did. And so I think we err if we look at Judas as a sympathetic character any more than we look at anybody as a sympathetic character. We should have sympathy for everybody, right? Everybody that's lost, we ought to have sympathy for. And certainly Judas, when we read about the end of his life, you know, I truly believe had Judas lived and had he obeyed the gospel and repented, Judas would have been saved too. But we know that he had a tragic ending to his life. So I think we have to be careful in being too sympathetic towards the way that we feel about him.
If not Judas, it would have been somebody else.
Right. Okay. Yes.
That his hardness of heart he was talking about. You know, think about Peter, he denied Christ. It's a pretty bad thing.
Yeah.
But Peter was willing to repent.
Yes. And I want to come back to that at the very end, so don't let me forget, which is going to be in just a few minutes. Because I think there is a key distinction between Judas and Peter that we need to look at. Luke 22. Somebody, if you would, nice and loud, read verses 1 through 6 of Luke 22.
Now the feast of the unleavened bread drew near, which is called Passover. The chief priests and the scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people. And Satan entered Judas, surnamed Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12. So he went his way and conferred with the chief priests and captains how he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him
Okay. Now, hopefully any sympathy that you might have had for Judas just left. Because notice a couple of things. Number one, verse 3, Satan entered Judas. Now, I don't think that this is a demon possession. What I think is this, is that Judas's heart was prepared for Satan to enter it, right? It's like that passage in Genesis chapter 4 where it said that if you don't follow God, that sin is crouching outside your door. Or we read in 1 Peter 5 that the devil walks about like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. That Satan is looking for that opportunity. And here in this moment for Judas, because of the greed that had filled his heart, Satan found it. And so at this moment, this is the turning point. This is where Satan entered Judas, and Judas makes the decision to betray. But
Satan not have been in his heart or influenced him throughout this whole war deal?
I don't think so. I think that I really feel like Judas was wrestling, right? That the whole time, even though he's taking money out, I think he's still wrestling with the things that are happening for good, right? That all that he sees accomplishing. Listen, if he didn't think Jesus was worth following, he wouldn't have wasted 3 years of his life. He would have said, well, phooey on this. This guy's a nut, right? I'm like, for 3 years he followed him around, and certainly he had influence. But then on the other side, there was the greed and the selfishness. And finally, it's like the counterbalance, right? Finally, the scales were tipped. Mike?
You kind of see that pattern of humanity in Judges. They would sin, then they would get in trouble and be punished. God would punish them by having someone take them over.
Yeah.
Then they would go back to God and ask forgiveness, and he would forgive. And for a while, they would be true to God because they would remember what you talked about, Moses and everything God had done for them. But they always just went back into idolatry and sin. So I think that's a lesson to us too, we have to watch ourselves.
Yes. Yeah, we have to be careful because our heart can be fully persuaded too.
So to Kenny's point, if when Satan entered into Judas, if he stayed there, we look at the fact that he actually threw the money back at the and so Satan had not, he must have left it then, but I'll agree that he was torn the whole time.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to that too. Hold on to that thought. So, but I do want us to notice a key point in this passage. So number one, Satan entered his heart. But number two, notice, I think people who haven't read this always assume that it was, the Jewish authorities that made overtures to Judas. But notice what it said. Who sought out who? Judas approached them, right? Look at the text in verse 4. And Judas went to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard and discussed with them how he might betray Jesus. I was listening to somebody talk about this week, and he said the arrest and execution of Jesus is the only time that we read about all of the Jewish authorities being on the same page in all of Scripture. The Sanhedrin, right, which is essentially the Jewish Supreme Court, it means the gathering together. The Pharisees, who were the ultra-conservatives, the Sadducees, who were kind of the liberals, they all came together for the arrest and betrayal of Jesus. Yeah. And so Judas approaches them. And what does it say in verse 5? The NIV says they were delighted and agreed to give him money. By the way, this is a minor point, but I think it's interesting. How much money was he given? 30 pieces of silver, but to Eric's point, it was the price of a slave. It's what a slave would have been worth in Old Testament times. And we read about Jesus in Philippians chapter 2, verse 5, taking on the form of servant and slave most of the time in Greek are the same word, that Jesus literally took on the form of a slave. His life was worth that of a fascinating detail. Okay, so we know the story. We know what happens. Judas, after the Passover, goes and he betrays Jesus, I was looking at some of the text. I thought this was interesting. The word there where it says the kiss does not indicate just one kiss, but a repeated process of kisses, right? That he repeatedly kissed Jesus. Like almost like, here he is, here he is, here he is. And the whole time feigning affection, right? And so we know the story. Judas betrays Jesus. And after Jesus' death, what does he do? Goes back to the authorities and tries to what? Tries to give the money back. And they refuse to take it. So what does he do? Yes, but later we read that he does what? He goes and he purchases a field and he hangs himself. He commits suicide, takes his own life. And the Bible says something really interesting about Judas. And we're almost out of time, so we can look at it later if we want to. It says that Judas felt remorse. Remorse. But to something Barry said and Eric said earlier, there's a difference between remorse and repentance. There's a difference. What is remorse?
Just being sorry for it.
Remorse is a feeling. What is repentance? It's the action of change. Judas could have repented, but instead, just like he let his greedy heart consume him, he let remorse consume him as well. And once again, this is another place where people might feel sympathy for Judas. But in the end, there's no way to know this. Was Judas more worried about the grief and the sorrow in his heart, or was he more worried about his reputation when it was discovered that he was the betrayer?
His reputation, apparently.
Yeah. And so Judas's life is tragic and his death is tragic, but he is known as the betrayer of Jesus and arguably one of the greatest villains of the Bible. I mean, you could liken him up with the Ahab and Jezebels and the Cains and just the worst people in the Bible that we read about. Judas is right up there because he betrayed. We used this illustration last week of Benedict Arnold, who betrayed the revolutionary cause and was just remembered, as this horrible villain. Well, Judas is up there, but on a much deeper level because he betrayed the only Son of God. And so I'll give you a little preview of the sermon here in just a second. Here's what boggles my mind about Judas. He was so close to salvation. He was so close to being part of Jesus' ministry. He was so close to the only Son of God for 3 years, and yet he still chose wrong. And in eternity, what a tragedy to be so close and still be lost. And so I think that's something to think about as one of the great tragic parts of Judas's life. All right, questions, comments, thoughts?
I was gonna say, I probably started out stealing a few ones, and got up to 5s, 10s, 20s, and just, probably started small, and just kept growing.
Yeah, yep. And that's what sin does, right? James gives us a peek into that process in James 1, doesn't it? Sin starts off small, and then when it's full grown, it leads to death. So yeah, great point. All right, thank you for the discussion this morning. We'll take a quick break. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to clarify one thing.
Sure.
I think you said that he purchased a field and later hanged himself, but he took the coins back to the temple and threw them on the floor in the temple, and the field was bought apart from Judas.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. All right, we'll take a quick break.